The one thing I'll say about Mr. Bronson is that he's consistent. I mean, I don't think anybody should be surprised by the positions he's taken. His whole campaign was running on no mandates, no. He was very clear about that. Give him credit.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club podcast and happy Thanksgiving. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today, our guest is former Anchorage Assembly member and recent mayoral candidate, Bill Evans. The politician who avoids the extremes of either the right or the left is an increasingly rare breed, but Bill Evans is that politician. We will discuss the difficulties of walking that middle road and the political peril that lies along that path. We will also talk about his time on the Cleveland police force in the 1980s. A police force that was 100% white in a city that was 35% black. He will reveal how he felt about that then and how he feels about it now. In light of yesterday's guilty verdict for the 3 murders in the Ahmad Arbery trial, we might say that progress is being made in America today. But one only need look back a week ago to the not guilty verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial to know how far we still have to go. Here to comment on that case will be Anchorage's first Chief Equity Officer, Clifford Armstrong III. But first, Bill Evans. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Andrew. Glad to be here.
So I just want to start right away. When we were kind of negotiating, doing the interview, I sent you a list of proposed questions, and I called you a moderate Republican, I think, and there was a little bit of back and forth about you not feeling comfortable with the terms. So I just wanted to open by talking about what's wrong with moderate Republican and what terms do you feel more comfortable with?
Yeah, it's good. It's more just a me thing. I mean, most people that know me or know of me would probably say the exact same thing. I'm sort of a moderate conservative, a moderate Republican. It's just those terms, either one of them, never feel, I don't use them for myself. I don't like the term moderate because to me, moderate, when I think of people that are moderate, it seems like just sort of a watered down version of something. So if you're a moderate conservative, you believe in conservative things, but not that much. And that doesn't seem to, at least to me, explain my views. I tend to be very passionate and very committed to very big views that I believe in. They don't seem moderate at all to me. So I've never liked the term moderate. And conservative, I think, most of my conservative friends would say I'm not conservative. Most of my liberal or progressive friends would say I'm not liberal or progressive. And to me, it's because I feel that I have elements of both. And it's not how we normally talk about those two things, progressive and conservative. We kind of put them in opposite camps and treat like you're one or the other, which I think contributes to sort of the tribalism in our politics.
During the mayoral runoff this past spring, you decided not to endorse either Bronson or Dunbar. Out of deference to your supporters, or
largely? I mean, a lot of the people who are most publicly in support of me, again, like Mayor Dan Sullivan, Ralph Samuels, and a bunch of people in the business community who are really, truly conservatives and identify that way, were clearly not going to support Forrest. They were going to support Bronson, whether they were excited about it or not. And it was a significant enough number of them that I didn't feel justified, or I didn't think it'd be a good idea to cut their legs out from under them after they'd been so kind to me during the race. I mean, the amazing thing running for office is it's just you're so full of gratitude for all these people to go out of their way to do things for you. And it wasn't comfortable. And there were some of my, I got calls from people on both sides that had supported me, begging me to endorse the other candidate. And I just felt it was better to stay out of it. I eventually put out on Facebook, the things I would look for in a candidate and let people decide which candidate that best represents.
For sure. I know exactly the statement you're talking about. And I remember thinking at the time, well, then just say the name. We can tell who you're talking about. And it's not Bronson. That's what I interpreted. In Must Read Alaska, there was an interview with you that appeared in March in which I can read the quote. It was about Forrest, and it was basically saying that he's the most progressive candidate, and that if we're not careful, he's going to get elected mayor. That was kind of the overarching thing. I'll read the quote. Forrest is not lying about being the most progressive candidate in this race. He runs on that, and he is willing to stand on that. But if we don't do a good job of putting someone who can beat Forrest in this race, that's who we're going to end up with. End of quote. Well, we didn't end up with him.
Yeah, I mean, the context of that is, while it seems, and Forrest and I are friends, it seems like an anti-Forrest comment. It's really more of an anti-Bronson comment, because the purpose of that, I'm trying to attract those voters that are sort of center and center-right. And it's sort of to say, like, look, if you're dissatisfied with the current administration, which was, and my sense was that was a fair amount of Anchorage, that, because of how things went down with Ethan's sort of end of his tenure, there was pretty widespread dissatisfaction with that direction and the direction of the assembly, frankly. So my point in that comment was that if you want to change in direction, it's me. It's not, if you don't vote for me, you're going to get somebody more extreme on the right. And that person on the right, who's Bronson in this case, my view wasn't going to be able to beat Forrest. I thought Dave's views, conservatives, were too extreme and wouldn't win. So it was basically my way of saying, no, I'm the alternative to the current situation. That's what that means.
Can you talk more? I guess, do you think ranked choice voting would have made a difference?
I'd like to think so. I mean, yeah, I think so. I think I would do better in a ranked choice voting scenario. I think I'd be a lot of people's second choices that voted for either Forrest or for Dave, but who knows?
Do you support ranked choice voting in general?
Yeah, I mean, when it was on the ballot, I was kind of ambivalent towards it. I just wasn't sure. I don't like tinkering with the election process generally to get different results, which was what it seemed like. But I would like to see how it plays out. I mean, again, because I don't typically get all enamored of candidates that I view as extreme in either direction, the ranked choice voting should get us a better group of candidates. And there are a couple of examples that I think are going to be fascinating to see how it works. The governor's race and the Senate race are going to be really interesting. So I'm hopeful for it, and I'm looking forward to giving it a try.
Okay, let's go back. So you grew up in Cleveland.
Yes, sir.
And I think I read that you were the first person in your family to graduate from high school?
Yeah, I come from very working class family, and back in that day it wasn't too unusual. But they'd drop out of school at some point, go work in factory jobs, or my mother was kind of raised by her, and she was a bartender. So that was my background. And did you go straight into the military after high school? Yeah, I was a terrible high school student. I was 295th in the class of 305. And didn't obviously have money for college or the grades for it, so it was either get a job in a factory or join the military. And I was looking for excitement, and the military seemed more exciting than that. I'd never been on a plane yet at that point, so just going anywhere seemed like it'd be a fun adventure. So you were enlisted? Yes, sir. You were in the Army? Yep. And tell us a little bit about that experience. It was good. I mean, it was good for me as a dumb 18-year-old kid as you can be. It helped me grow up a bit because it, forced you to be somewhat more disciplined. It was hard. I was a paratrooper, so I got that adventure I was looking for. I was also an intelligence analyst, so I had this, as an 18-year-old kid, I had a top secret special compartmentalized information clearance, got to do some, real world kind of intelligence stuff. So it was kind of intellectually kind of fulfilling too. So it was a good 3 years. I was able to save up some money for college. So yeah, I think it was it helped me a lot. Did being in the military tell you that you wanted to go to college, or had you always wanted to go to college, or what was your... I think I always wanted to go to college. Even when I was just blowing off high school, I always had this idea that, I could go to college, and, that's eventually what I would do. So yeah, I planned as soon as I got out of the military, and I did. Once I got out, I enrolled in school. And then
I guess, so you went to college
Mhm.
and then you became a police officer, or?
Yeah, I started college, Cleveland State. It was like great college downtown Cleveland, commuter school. And while I was doing that in my second year, I applied for the police department, and got that job and finished college while I was a police officer.
Okay. And you also did SWAT team?
Yeah, after my second year in the police department, I got on the SWAT team and did that as well, which was, I was still young enough that, I was still looking for things that were kind of exciting, and those certainly were.
And what led you away from being a career police officer? Or?
I graduated, after a couple of years, I finally graduated from Cleveland State and had a degree in history and political science, and said, okay, now I've gone through college. What do I do with that? And by that time, I'd been on the department like about 6 years, and it was getting kind of routine, and it wasn't as exciting as it was when I first got on, like any job. But law school, I had seen lawyers operate as a police officer. I testified at trials, did things like that, and thought it was something that was kind of in my skills set range and that I would probably be pretty decent at. So started looking at law schools and applied, took the LSAT, and next thing I know, I was off to law school.
Especially given like the last 2 years of George Floyd and lots of discussion of police and how policing works in America. Did your experience as a police officer inform your thoughts over the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it would have to. I mean, it's a bit of an advantage having been a police officer, to having lived that, seen that life, seen the reality. It definitely informs it. I mean, I was on an all-white police department in a city that was, probably 35-40% black, all-male police department. It was sort of an end of an era in that sense. And there were a lot of race issues, and there were a lot of racists. And I understand how the expectations we put on police, what we consider a good job, kind of conflicts with certainly some areas of justice in minority communities, and also the incarceration rates that we have across the country. It's not necessarily individual. I have, friends, some of my best friends in the world were former police, and they're all retired now. But I like police officers, but the system we have definitely needs reevaluation. I'm not a fan of defund the police. I think that was a kind of a knee-jerk reaction, understandably. But I am a fan of, rethink the police. I think, it's 21st century, and I think we need to look at how we do things better.
What years were you?
84 through 89.
And that was all male, all white police department for the most part?
Yep, in our department it was 100%.
And did you feel that was a problem then? Did you notice it, or did it seem normal?
It seemed normal. It definitely, I was aware of, the attitudes that brought towards the minority community in our city. But everybody it was kind of fun in a way, in the sense that everybody I worked with were all the same kind. We're all, again, that working class white kid area. We were all around the same age, and it was like, it was very familiar. Good people, some much more racist, and admittedly, when I grew up, just about everybody that I knew was pretty racist. People would acted a lot different than they do now. Weren't necessarily malevolent racist that wished bad on people, but had different attitudes towards, especially blacks. This is Cleveland; it's basically a black-white dynamic there. That played out in ways that they wouldn't necessarily even think about. And I had this, I going to college at the same time, and being, I became very enamored of the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King at that time. So I'm sitting in the police car, reading this, I'm trying to think of the name of the book, this biography on King. and seeing this all go around. So it was a very, educational experience.
Do you recall any specific incidents or anything that happened at that time that's kind of stuck with you? Because it just seems like if it's an all-white police department, I assume that the people you're arresting are not all white in a city with that kind of racial diversity. And so you kind of have this system of the white people arresting the black people. Were you cognizant of it then?
Yeah, I was very cognizant of it. And I arrested black people, I arrested white people too, but I'd say, yeah, probably certainly percentage-wise, given the percentage of the blacks in the community, that there was a much higher percentage of arrests. Situation you see nationwide. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was very cognizant of it, and I was aware that the other officers would often have attitudes towards blacks that were racist. I never saw, I can say I never saw anybody like lie or incarcerate or arrest someone who wasn't, doing something that was deserving of arrest. I never seen anything, like the George Floyd, the brutality kind of things. The attitude was there, but fortunately, at least in my experience, I never saw it manifested in anything that I thought was overtly wrong.
Well, you said some of the police officers you worked with were racist.
Yeah.
Were just,
Straight
a product.
up racist. Yeah.
Yes. But you never saw them do anything that you would say was racist in terms of arrests or how they. But I would think that if they were straight up racist, that would inform their decisions.
It does, and in the way that racism impacts the relationships with minority communities generally, even if it causes a greater focus more than anything else. If somebody, a police officer, is racist, the things they focus on are going to be driven by that attitude towards these other people. So I think a lot of that, where you see a lot more arrests and things like that, while the arrests may be, crimes may actually have been committed and the arrests may be legitimate in that sense, you're seeing more of it in those communities because the police are focusing more, because they have this built-in attitude that people are more criminally inclined or things like that. Mm-hmm. So it's in that level of almost racial profiling. You'll see, if a car with what I would see, I guess I take that back. It was certainly commonplace where you see like a carload of 4 black teenagers get pulled over for something where you probably would not have seen it if it was for white kids. Absolutely, and that part I did see, and that did occur.
Did it bother you?
It bothered me. It bothers me more in retrospect than it probably did at the time, to be honest with you. It's not like I said anything or I took some kind of brave stand against that. In large part because it was, it's kind of it's a vicious circle in the sense that you end up, because of that focus, you end up seeing more arrests in that community, which reinforces the loop that there's more criminality going there. So it kind of justifies the greater emphasis. So yeah, I was in my 20s and probably wasn't as disturbed by it as I should have been.
Do you think things have gotten better?
I think so. I know that department that I was on back in Cleveland is integrated now. It's got black officers, got female officers. So I think probably their perspectives are different than they were. Coming up here to Anchorage, I've had interactions with Anchorage police, and they're they to Anchorage police's benefit, are a different type of police force than I was involved. But they're much more professional. I think they do a better job of those things, and I can only maybe extrapolate that things are better nationwide. I'm sure there are pockets still, probably not as evident as back in the 80s, when I was on the department. But I think things are getting better. Body cams certainly changed the game in how police can behave.
Do you support the body cams going on the officers here?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think it's good for a lot of reasons. I think people have to understand that even those body cams, sometimes you have to look at what's on the cam and take it in a broader context. But I think having the body cam is a good piece of evidence for what took place.
You mentioned Alaska in 1998. So you went to law school after you finished college. You left the police, and then you came up here in 98. What brought you to Alaska?
Our last year of law school, my wife was pregnant with our first child. We had 3 kids in the next 6 years. But Melinda, my wife, and I were, and we always were a little restless. We watched too many shows of Northern Exposure and Dances with Wolves, and had this grand idea of life out west being more interesting. And so just applied a number of places in the western U.S., and Alaska was a particular fascination. We'd never been to Alaska.
You ran for Assembly in what year?
2014.
2014. What happened in 2017? You just were bored.
It was the tedium. Yeah, it's like, I got those things done that I kind of thought would do. There's always other stuff to do, but I was fairly satisfied. And I found myself in those meetings on Tuesday night, like just looking at the clock and wishing it would just get through. And I think that's no place for, you bring somebody else in who's excited about it again. And so I just stepped away.
Do you miss it?
At times, but certainly not lately. I mean, I can't even imagine what I would do or say if I was on the Assembly during this last year or so.
Okay, well, let me ask you that question. What would you do or say?
I don't know. I have a temper. I don't know. I mean, I would have had a hard time at times just, being as passive as some of the Assembly members have been taking that abuse. I don't know. That's the Irish in me that at some point I probably would have said something stupid in return or done something stupid. I'd at least be afraid that I would do that. I wouldn't. Then again, I have, I sound like an arrogant guy now. I tend to have an ability in groups that I'm in to kind of calm things down and bring people together. And then so I think sometimes, well, maybe, I would be able to say things during these meetings that would help de-escalate it, and kind of regret that maybe I didn't, stick around to try that.
So when I asked you a lot of questions where I was thinking of you as the moderate Republican, I was in my head, I think, kind of grouping you with Crystal Kennedy as being sort of more in that vein. And it was very clear from watching those nights of testimony that it was 9-2 most of the time, that it was very clear that there were 9 who were in support of the ordinance and 2 that were not. It sounds to me now, though, that you did. I don't know. Did you support the mask ordinance?
Oh, yeah. I would have done it differently. But yeah, I thought, it's such a minor thing. I think both the mayor's office, the administration, and the Assembly could have handled that better. It's easy being in the peanut gallery saying that. But yeah, I support taking reasonable, responsible measures to curb the pandemic. We should have acted before the hospitals got into crisis. The time to act on those things is when the numbers start ramping up, not when they hit their max. But the political realities, and I wrote to a number of Assembly people that I stay in contact with, and kind of urged them, do something. But I understand their position too. They knew the hell that was going to be raised in doing that, and I could see why it would be, not doing it unless you really had to.
Well, you mentioned it. I mean, Bronson's behavior, the mayor's behavior. I think I've been surprised by how much he's doubled down, hosting an event, that was basically questioning the value of vaccines, promoting unproven treatments. I feel like saying, well, if I were the mayor, I would have done a little bit different, is really understating.
Well, here's the thing. The one thing I'll say about Mr. Bronson is that he's consistent. I mean, I don't think anybody should be surprised by the positions he's taken. His whole campaign was running on no mandates, no. He was very clear about that. Give him credit. It's like, this shouldn't surprise anybody that he is doubling down on this issue, because it was like the core of his campaign. I think he could have done it. Even saying that, all I think he had to do was say, look, I ran on there being no mask mandates. I stand by that. I'm going to veto whatever they put in front of me because I don't believe in it. List all the liberty issues you want to list. But he shouldn't have stirred up the crowd. He didn't need to, make that whole filibuster thing go on. He could have said, I think they're wrong. I'm going to veto. We have a process. If they want to override my veto, that's fine. But this is the position we're taking. And I think he would have fulfilled his obligations that he ran on while not dividing the city further. But again, it's...
So you mentioned the filibuster.
Mm-hmm.
The Assembly stopped the filibuster by doing an emergency ordinance. You said you would have done it differently. Would you not have supported the emergency ordinance to basically shut down the filibuster?
Well, I guess it depends on what position you're putting me. If I was on the Assembly or if I was the mayor.
Right. Well, I'm putting you on the position of the Assembly for this particular moment.
If I was on the Assembly, I would have tried to put through do an emergency ordinance sooner and never bring it to a public testimony. It boggles the mind to know why you would go through a public process like that if it's in fact an emergency. It either is or it isn't. And I think there's sufficient evidence out there to consider it an emergency and to take that action.
Well, I'll put words in your mouth. I think if you were mayor, then the Assembly offered some resolutions. I think at the end of August, they offered a resolution encouraging masking, encouraging social distancing. I think if you had been mayor, you would have signed on. You would have been part of that.
If I was mayor, I would say, give me the emergency authority to take care of this, like they did before. And I will pass the resolution, I would take the executive actions that need to be taken. And I would go out and use communications to explain to people why I was taking these actions and why they were needed. And I'd also make it clear, that the cops aren't going to come and arrest you if you don't have a mask on. And I would tell employers that we don't want you to engage these people that aren't wearing a mask. We want you to post signs saying you have to wear a mask in your place. We want you to have your employees wear a mask. But if people aren't wearing a mask, don't cause problems by engaging them. People are just too worked up. And we would have had more compliance. Not everybody would have complied, but it would have been the best we could do without inciting all of the divisiveness.
So going back to the divisiveness while you were on the Assembly, the equal rights, the big controversy was about including trans rights. Mm-hmm. From the first podcast episode with Heather Flynn, she talked about discussion, I think that she had with you, or it might have been Patrick.
It was Patrick.
Yes. So that... that not including trans rights would be basically having a loophole that discrimination would be allowed somewhere. Is that correct?
Yeah. When I was putting together the original ordinance, the issue of trans rights was something. It was an issue that I didn't know a lot about, and so I reached out to a number of people to ask about it because I thought it'd be very easy to pass it without that. I knew that was going to be the sticking point, the whole bathroom issues. I think people would have probably passed, an ordinance, protecting sexual orientation pretty easly. But I talked to enough people that convinced me that you can't leave out the trans aspect of it. Patrick was one. Even Jennifer Johnson said, those are the people that actually need the most protection. And it convinced me, and I said, okay, I learned, and we put it in there, and which was the right thing to do.
And you took some heat for it.
Yeah, a lot of heat. Actually, it was interesting. As you remember, the ordinance I proposed was an attempt. I'm naive politically a lot of times and idealistic. I have these romantic notions of how we can all, work together. I proposed something that I thought would get passed with kind of grudging acceptance by both sides, because it did include some things that were protections for people that have religious objections to. It was back in the era where baking the wedding cakes was all the rage. Mm-hmm. So it was something in there that gave businesses an option, and it was carefully worded. I don't remember exactly how it went, but my idea was that, okay, the right won't get so worked up and resist this and bring all the people in buses like they did last time. if they have this kind of thing in there. So I thought it would be a great kumbaya when everybody think I was great and we would pass the ordinance and Anchorage would be a better place. What happened is both sides hated it instead. But they objected to the parts that they didn't like. So I was getting pilloried from the left and the right for a while. And then Patrick proposed the supplement to mine, the new version that took most of the protection. There was actually a couple protections he left in, ministerial protections that I had in mine. And it was kind of an effort to merge the two, but make it much more just protecting the rights of the LGBT community. And that's the one we passed, and it worked out.
Well, I think I could make an analogy that between the mask ordinance and that in terms of having an exemption for wearing a mask if you have a medical exemption. I think people are getting religious exemptions for the vaccine. You know, I look at it with the same sort of squinty eye that, the religious exemption to LGBTQ stuff. I mean, I feel like that there are many people who would say they're the same religion who don't need to use that religious exemption to not bake the wedding cake or whatever. So I think it's a little bit, I'm suspicious of it. I had planned to ask you because in that same article with Must Read Alaska in March, and again, I understand that politically you're trying to appeal to a Republican base, a conservative base, but when asked about the bathroom equal rights ordinance as it was stated in the article, it says, quote, Evans explained it was a compromise with a far-left mayor, Berkowitz, who was preparing far-reaching LGBTQ protections to the detriment of those with sincerely held religious beliefs. In the end, Evans said the ordinance was hijacked and the religious protections he had hoped for were diminished.
It was a bad quote.
Okay.
I'm sure I've never said that there was high. I mean, I worked cooperatively with Patrick in that we sat down and did that. I never thought it was hijacked. I did, I obviously to that audience, I do play up the fact that it was real. I did try to put in those protections, thinking that, the best thing for Anchorage would be to be like a model of a place where you can get things done like this. In hindsight now, I'm glad it passed without those, because even though they were fairly tailored to be very limited, people would always try to, drive a truck through any exemption you put in. So it ends up better off. But yeah, that was the reality of what I was trying to do. And actually, I know Farley, I think that's probably Suzanne's editorializing on what I was saying, because I went to Ethan and I met with Ethan and Mike Abbott and I think Bill Falsey at the time, who was legal director, and told them what I was going to do. I mean, I went to them and said, I'm thinking of introducing this. I thought it was a good idea coming from a Republican, because I was still in the party at that time. I thought it was a better look and better for the city for me doing it than them doing it.
So I'm just going to identify for our listeners, Suzanne Downing would be the writer for Must Read Alaska. But I will say that her, writing it in the way she did was trying to help you appeal to her audience.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. So although it may not be what you really thought, she seemed to be on your side and trying to appeal and sort of excuse the lack of the religious exemption from.
Yeah, and I mean, I've done the same thing myself in describing the process of, how that equal rights ordinance came to be. If I'm talking to an audience that I know is very conservative, I play up, certain facts. I mean, I don't lie about the story or change the facts, but there are certain aspects of it that I play up, and it was basically, I think she's spinning it to my, thinking she's helping me, yeah.
I'm going to kind of harken back to our discussion about race on the police force.
Okay.
I have lost friends in the past few months by my willingness to attempt to create a more broad coalition. I have people who have defriended me and blocked me on Twitter because we're going to host a town hall for Bill Walker. And some of their arguments, which I can see, I'll use this as an example. A black woman has said that when I get excited, I'm going to use specific examples and maybe get in trouble.
Okay.
But when Senator Lisa Murkowski votes with the Republican senators 95% of the time, but then does one vote that goes against the grain, and I encourage people to send her a thank you note, and I encourage people to reach out, and I want to praise her for that. There's a lot of anger because it's 95% of the time she's supporting policies that hurt me and my children, that I feel unseen by. And I feel awkward saying that today because she voted for the John Lewis voting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is great. But
really great. Yeah.
But again, she's one person. They needed 60 votes. They got 51. It doesn't mean anything. There are people writing on my Facebook page right now about how, that she's able to do this stuff because it doesn't actually happen. And, who are very suspicious of her vote. I disagree. But I guess what I'm saying is this kind of goes into your whole thoughts about how we're moving to these sides, because that area in the middle, if you're not with us, you're against us mentality is there. And I think there's no easy way.
There's definitely no easy way. I mean, I view everybody as being assembled out of such crooked timbers that we're all screwed up in our own way. There are no perfect politicians. I mean, I'd be very suspicious if anybody votes exactly how you want them to vote in every way possible. I don't even vote. I wish I would have changed votes I've had in the past. So I haven't voted in the way I want to vote all the time.
Can you name one of those?
Not really. I'm just assuming there's one. There probably is. I just can't think of any. But the point is, you have to encourage people when they do good things, even if they're doing other things you don't agree with. So I agree wholeheartedly, and I think part of the answer and part of the way out of this is to say, okay, yeah, I disagree with you 95% of the time, but what you did there was good, and I support that. I applaud you. Thank you. And that's how we sort of bring people together. And on both sides it has to go on, because I'm sure there are examples, that where probably people do things the other way that people should acknowledge. But again, that's it. If you think everybody's so perfect and everybody is going to get this right and everybody is attuned to everybody's situation, it's just not true. I mean, I fumble into issues all the time where I don't mean to take a position that harms anybody or that is offensive to anybody, but I'm ignorant of a lot of stuff. Ignorant of far more stuff than I'm knowledgeable about. And I think most people are too. So I think that we just have to give each other a break sometimes and look. It's the attitude. We don't look for the best in people. We tend to look for the worst, and we see the things that they're doing bad. I think if we just turn that around and actually, it's a Ted Lasso moment. I think, if you've seen that show, it's like, if you're a little more like Ted Lasso and you look for the best in people, you start bringing out that best, and it's sappy, but that's how I believe.
Are you going to run for office again?
I have no plans to. I don't think I'm particularly well suited in the current time to run for anything successfully, and I tend to be sort of spontaneous on it. If I do run, it'll be something I just...
Last question we ask of all our guests: is there a book that you can recommend to our listeners?
This is a tortuous question because I am a lover of books. It's my main thing. And I just struggle with picking one book, but I'm going to cheat a little bit and just, instead of one book, I'm going to pick a trilogy. It's a 3-part series. It's Taylor Branch's America in the King Years, Parting the Waters, Pillar of Fire, and At Canaan's Edge. Very in-depth, shows the whole arc of the civil rights movement in a way that, doesn't get discussed in more superficial treatments. and kind of makes you almost feel like you've lived through it in that. And it also shows how, the civil rights movement kind of was changing at the very end to a more economic justice movement, which I think is an important fact that kind of got lost, with Dr. King's assassination and everything. But if I had to pick one book, and it's torturous to pick one, I pick those three.
It's a good choice. Bill Evans, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's been a great pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And now, commenting on the not guilty verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, we have Anchorage's first Chief Equity Officer, Clifford Armstrong III.
Of all the processing I've seen and heard folks go through since Kyle Rittenhouse was found not guilty on all counts, the one consistent through line is that nobody is surprised. Angry, happy, concerned, tired, all of those things, sure, but not surprised. Why is it not surprising that a 17-year-old boy had a semi-automatic rifle? Why is it not surprising that he killed 2 people and grievously wounded a third? Why is it not surprising that he was acquitted on all counts that were levied? The answer, to put it simply, is because this is America. These are our laws, and this is who we are, collectively. There are 2 truths from this case that are critical. The first is that the self-defense laws of Wisconsin and many other states are such that you can contextually instigate the environment in which you experience fear of harm and then act on that fear by killing others without criminal conviction. This is exactly what happened to Trayvon Martin in Florida. The second is that the dead tell no tales, so you will never get their side of the story. The jury did what the law suggests they should have done here. This case will be more fuel in the fire of those who wish for systemic change to our judicial system. I hope we all wish for something to go differently next time. Perhaps the person with the gun could just stay home. The way these laws are applied suggests the most reasonable behavior is to always be armed and to always shoot to kill. What is unreasonable has been made the logical thing to do. That should concern everyone. This realization was not lost on the parents of Anthony Huber, one of the people slain by Rittenhouse. As they said, the verdict sends the unacceptable message that armed civilians can show up in any town, incite violence, and then use the danger they have created to justify shooting people in the street. That message is also the playbook of the Proud Boys, whom Rittenhouse was found in a bar with 2 months after killing Joseph Rosenbaum and Anthony Hubbard and grievously wounding Gage Grosskreutz. Kyle was wearing a shirt that read, "Free as f***." You know, that curse word that rhymes with duck. That is America today. Our courts use the same laws to protect domestic violence victims as folks like Rittenhouse and George Zimmerman. We celebrate and incentivize violence while praising and hoping for nonviolence. This level of hypocrisy is not tenable. It's okay to grieve the idealized version of America at times like these. You know, the America where we all love one another, or at least respect each other and act like we value life. Irrespective of how far we've come as a nation, situations like these demonstrate how far we still have to go.
Thank you to Bill Evans and Clifford Armstrong III. Lots of gratitude to Corey Coolidge for making this podcast listenable. And thank you to you, our listeners. Reminder, we also host live Zoom events. Please visit eastanchoragebbookclub.com for more information. In 2 weeks, our guest is a founding father of Alaska, 97-year-old Victor Fischer, who will discuss his youth in Nazi Germany and Stalinist Russia. Please tune in.